Can you really lose fat and build muscle at the same time? Most people think you only have two choices, bulk up or cut down. And if you're skinny fat, neither of those options serve you. This video is a complete step-by-step guide to get you from skinny fat to absolutely jacked. Let's get into it. So the problem we're trying to solve is that you are skinny fat. One word. What does skinny fat mean? Skinny fat is not a medical condition. You don't have skinny fat like you do the flu or cancer. It is simply a way to describe that you don't have a lot of muscle mass, but you do have high fat. And basically, the ratio between muscle and fat is unfavorable. Ideally, you want the opposite of this. You want to have high muscle and low fat. But right now, you're on the opposite end of the spectrum. How do we solve this? You probably heard the term body recomposition somewhere. I'm going to show you exactly how it works and how you can do it yourself if you want to. But first, we have to define it. So we know that this has to do with your body, but I prefer to split up recomposition into its two little words. I want you to look at the word re as a synonym, a word with the same meaning as change, and composition as how you look. More specifically, that ratio of muscle to fat, we are trying to switch that around. So if you look at body recomposition, we are changing how we look. Does this mean that our weight's going to change, that we're going to experience some drastic weight loss or weight gain transformation? No, your weight is going to stay relatively the same. You can expect some weight loss because we'll talk about the actual process of how it works. But relatively speaking, your weight is going to be pretty similar to when you started. It's just that we are exchanging the weight we have from fat to the weight we have from muscle. Now I want to crush this right now before anybody has any questions. No, you cannot convert, at least naturally, fat into muscle. Fat cannot be exchanged into muscle. All we are doing is that the weight that we are carrying, that is body fat, is coming down, and the weight that we carry from muscle is going up. And so it appears that we are exchanging the two, but you can't actually switch, you know what I mean? You can't switch fat into muscle. That's not how it works. We're just changing the weight. And so if you look at body recomposition, the definition of it, it is changing how you look and that ratio of muscle to fat. And we're trying to change it into something that is more favorable. And the first step to achieving a body recomposition is to know your maintenance calories. Now, what are your maintenance calories? That is a fabulous question. Every single human being has an amount of calories they need to stay alive. And by staying alive, these calories that are eaten are used as fuel. So I want you to look at calories from here on out as a substance that can be converted into energy. And so these calories are used for your brain, for your organs, for your body to function, to work, to stay alive. But eventually, you have an amount of calories needed to maintain your current weight. And so that is your maintenance calories, this number right here. Now this number is different for everybody, but if you eat less than that maintenance calories, you will lose weight. If you eat more than that maintenance calories, you will gain weight. If you eat so few calories, basically no calories, eventually over a period of time, you will die. If you eat so many calories beyond what's needed to maintain your current weight, and I'm talking like 800, 1,000, 2,000 calories over your maintenance, thinking that these extra calories are gonna go straight to muscle growth. Newsflash, they're not. And so these extra calories will instead be used as stored energy. And an easier, faster way to say that is body fat. Now, if you remember from earlier, if we look at skinny fat, we have low muscle and high fat. And so it makes sense if we don't want to get more skinny fat that we don't want to eat a ton of extra calories over our maintenance. Instead, we either want to eat a little bit above or a little bit below. If you're deciding between these two things, most times it's going to be a little bit below. And so I'm going to show you how to do a recomposition by eating a little bit below this maintenance calories. But before we start anything, we have to know what this number is, our maintenance calories. The problem with not knowing where this number is if you estimate it to be over here and then you start your recomposition, you're actually eating that many more calories than your maintenance. If you assume it to be back here, then you're eating way too few calories. And so it would make sense that we don't need to know the exact number because you're probably never going to get the exact number right, but at least have an estimate that is close to this. And so I'm going to show you how to do that. The first step to finding your maintenance calories is to go to the internet. Go to Google or Bing or Firefox or whatever search browser you use and search up calorie calculator. So I'll put CC right here, calorie calculator. You're going to go to the first website you see, and it's going to ask you for some information, some stats. It'll ask you for your height, your weight, your age, your gender, your activity level. And so you want to be as accurate as possible with these metrics, because if you're inaccurate with your metrics, it's going to give you an inaccurate amount of calories. And so you want to make sure that you're on the ball with these. From there, you're going to hit the calculate button, and it's going to say, to maintain your current weight, eat 2,500 calories a day. Let's assume for this video that your maintenance is 2,500 calories. And so it's going to say, to keep your current weight, you need to eat that many calories a day. What I want you to do now is eat that amount of calories. And from this third step, there are two questions that arise. How do we calculate the amount of calories we need to eat? And how long do we eat that amount of calories for? I'm going to answer this second question first. How long do we eat that amount of calories that the calculator gave us? For this video, I'm going to use the number 2,500. Now, 2,500 isn't your maintenance. Your maintenance could be 3,000, 2,000, 1,500. Doesn't really matter what the number is. I'm just going to use 2,500 for the video. How long do we eat 2,500 calories for? I don't want you to eat that amount of calories for an hour, a day, 2 days. I want you to eat 2,500 calories every single day for 1 week. This next week, I want you to eat that every single day. This is exactly why. I want you to weigh in at the start of the week. So before you eat that amount of calories every day for a week, and then you're going to eat that calories day in, day out for 7 days. And so every single day, you're going to eat that 2,500 calories. 1 week later, I want you to weigh in again. And so let's assume that you weigh in for the first time at 130 pounds. You're skinny fat at 130 pounds. You eat that amount of calories every single day for the next week, and you weigh in again, and you weigh in at 130 pounds. So after this week of eating 2,500 calories, or whatever your maintenance number is, you end up at the same weight. What does that mean? That means that the amount of calories that the calculator gave you, the estimate that it gave you the first time, is your maintenance calories, or is a good estimate for your maintenance calories. Now, if your weight stays between a 0 and 1 pound range, I'd say that this still stands true. And so if you gain 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, whatever, that much weight in a week, I'd still say that this is a good maintenance spot. If you lose that amount of weight, I'd still say it's a good maintenance spot. But if you end up gaining a lot of weight and you end up at 131.4 by the end of the week, you gain 1.4 pounds in a week, this amount of calories is going to be too much for a recomposition. And so the goal is not to gain a lot of weight. The goal is not to lose a lot of weight. The goal is to stay relatively the same weight, but exchange the weight we have for fat for muscle. And so if you gain a bunch of weight, this amount of calories is going to be too much to recomp off of. But if you go through this week-long process and you lose a bunch of weight, maybe you end up at 128 pounds, I'd say this amount of calories is too little for you. And so ideally you want to be around the same weight, or at least within a 1 pound range, by the end of this week-long process. And so for simplicity's sake, let's assume that your weight stays the same. You go from 130 pounds, eat that amount of calories every single day for a week, and you end up at 130 pounds. What do we do now? Real quick, I want to say that this entire process, this week-long process, if you have not done this yet and you're kind of estimating where your maintenance calories are, I wouldn't recommend skipping this. I know it's a week long and you want to start building muscle and getting in shape right away. I get it. But this is the first step, because I'd rather have you take the time and get it right than estimate and get it wrong and then have to adjust later and you have no idea what adjustments to make. Now, we're going to cover all the adjustments you need to make in this video, but I'd rather you take the first week to do it properly. And so for anyone who is concerned about it taking more than a week, fitness is not for you. Results take time, and so you have to give time to operate. What do we do now? Since we know where to find our maintenance calories and we know how many to eat, let's assume it's 2,500 for this video, how do we actually eat 2,500 calories? The easiest answer I can give that a lot of people won't like is to track your calories. Now, I understand the pain and the discomfort and the annoyance of tracking calories, people make it out to be some big devil. And the reality is they just don't understand how to do it and how to do it fast. So I'm going to show you how to do it lightning fast, like I'm talking 2 to 3 minutes a day, so that you know how many calories you're eating. Why would you want to know how many calories you're eating? Well, like the maintenance calories, if you, and I get this all the time in comments, I've gotten a ton of DMs about this in recent videos. I have people saying, dude, I can't gain weight. Like, it's literally impossible. I eat so much food and I literally can't put weight on the scale. It's impossible. They think they're eating so many more calories than their maintenance, but the reality is they're not tracking correctly or they're not tracking at all. And so they're probably eating what they think is a lot of calories, but is actually right under their maintenance. And so to those people, if you're watching this video, I say that you're not a medical phenomenon, you're just not eating enough calories. There's pretty much no people in the world who can defy this law. If you don't know where this number is, like I said, you are guessing, and I'd rather you not guess and get it correct. So how do we track calories? It's 4 very easy steps. The first step to tracking calories is to get an empty dish and a food scale. And so a food scale costs 20, 25 bucks max, not expensive at all. An empty dish could be a cup, it could be a bowl, it could be a plate, whatever you put the food on or inside of, you want to get that as it's empty and put it on the food scale. The second step is to add your food. And so once you have the dish, let's assume it's a cup, and you put it on the food scale, when you turn the food scale on, it's going to read 0, the number 0. And that could be 0 ounces, 0 grams. I'm Canadian, so we're going to assume that it's grams. Now you're going to add the food or the drink or whatever you plan to consume. And so I want you to know that 1 milliliter of water or fluid equals 1 gram. And so if you're measuring out milk in a cup, you don't have to switch it from grams to milliliters. It is the same. 1 kilogram also equals 1 liter. So you add the food to the scale. What do you do next? Let's just say the food you add to your cup is chicken thighs. I'll put CT right here. You have cooked chicken thighs. And so you put it on the scale and it reads back a number. It reads back 100 grams. What do we do with this 100 grams of our chicken thighs? We need to track it. How do we do that? You could track it on the Notes app in your phone. You could track it on a pen and paper, but the easiest way to do it and get it right is to use a calorie tracking app. Now you've probably seen MyFitnessPal or a bunch of other different apps. The one that I use is called Fat Secret. Now I've been using this for the past 3 years straight. It has a weight logger. It has all the foods you'll ever need. I'm not sponsored by them, but it's a very good app and it's free to use. It's also the easiest calorie tracker to use, in my opinion. And so whatever app that you choose to use, you will search the food that you're eating. So in this case, it's going to be chicken thighs, and you're going to enter 100 grams or however much weight the scale read back to you. And you're going to repeat that for every single food you eat every single day. So you put an empty dish on the food scale, add your food, track it in the app by searching up the food, entering the weight, and then repeating that process again and again and again. That is fundamentally how you track calories. But does that mean you're going to get it perfect every single time? You're going to be 100% correct? No, you're going to make mistakes. And I'm going to show you the 3 biggest mistakes that people make when they are tracking their calories and how to avoid them. One of the most common mistakes guys make when tracking calories is that they estimate the amount of calories you're eating. And so what I mean by this is if you're tracking with cups, if you're tracking with tablespoons, with scoops, there's nothing inherently wrong tracking with these things. These are what you call volumetric measurements. And so people will track the amount of food in a cup or a tablespoon or a scoop and then put 1 scoop or 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, 1 cup of milk. The problem is if you're tracking your milk in your cup, but you don't actually get it to exactly 1 cup, exactly level, and you still track it as 1 cup, you are now underestimating the amount of food that you're eating. If you have a heaping scoop or you have more food in the cup than is considered 1 cup and you track it as 1 cup, then that means you have a heaping scoop. And so that's more food than what you need. So you'd be overestimating. The easiest solution to solve this problem is to get a food scale, which is why I use that as the example of what to track with. If you get a food scale, it's going to read back the exact amount of weight, either in grams, in ounces, whatever unit you use, but it's going to be exact, and so you never really miss. Like I said, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with volumetric measurements. It's just, if you're right here and you're trying to hit your calorie goal for the day, why would you not be exact? Why would you not go 100%? And so measuring with volumetric measurements is the difference between you hitting and not hitting your calorie goal. If you were to eat in heaping scoops, you were to eat too much food, then you'd be overestimating the amount of calories you need. And since we're trying to do a recomposition, we don't need more calories. We actually need less. And so you need to have this number, this maintenance calorie number, dialed in. If you're gonna go through all the effort, you may as well get it right. The second mistake that guys make is that they don't separate the foods that they're eating. And so what I mean by this, if you have a bowl and then you have chicken thighs, ground beef, rice, corn, and broccoli, you don't just add all the foods in and weigh it one time, because all these foods could be 792 grams of what? 792 grams of what kind of food? Well, it's a combination of all of these things. And so you need to weigh out the foods individually. The order in which you measure the foods doesn't really matter, but you have your chicken thighs, your ground beef, your rice, your corn, your broccoli, whatever I said. And so you're gonna weigh these out one at a time. Now in total, you might have 792 grams of food, but you might have 100 grams of ground beef, 200 grams of chicken, 300 grams, you know what I mean, right? We need to measure each of these individually. And so the total weight is not the total amount of calories. Different foods have different calories. The same also applies for when you're cooking. And so if you're cooking with the goal of building muscle and being precise with it, it would make sense that you cook your chicken, your beef, your rice, your vegetables separately. And so a lot of people will throw these into a stir fry or combine them. I don't think there's anything wrong with this. I'm just saying if you want to know exact amount of calories you're eating, cook them one at a time. And so it helps to have 2 pots, 2 pans, a dual surface stove that you can cook them on. But this video isn't about cooking. This video is about recomposition. And so a big mistake guys make when tracking calories while doing a recomp is not separating their foods. Mistake number 3. A huge problem that guys make when tracking calories is not knowing the difference between the weights of their foods when they are raw and cooked. What is the difference? Well, if we have our chicken thighs from earlier, our 100 grams of chicken thighs, some people, although they might understand this, they don't actually know that there is a loss of weight when you cook the food. When you're cooking meats, when you're cooking frozen vegetables, these things lose weight in the cooking process. And so the amount of weight you lose is dependent on how lean the meat is or how much water is held in the frozen vegetables, but we'll talk about meats right now. With chicken thighs, this is a fattier meat, and so you can expect to lose 25 to 30% of the weight in the cooking process. What does that look like? Well, if you have 100 grams of raw chicken thighs, after cooking, you can expect to end up with about 70 grams. This becomes a huge problem when guys, myself included, I made this mistake for years. It becomes a big problem when guys assume this 100 grams to turn out to be 100 grams after cooking. But that's not true. We've lost weight. And so it's actually 70 grams cooked to 100 grams raw. And so if you were to track it as 100 grams cooked, thinking that the weight stays the same, you're actually overestimating the amount of food that you're eating. And if you are overestimating the amount of food you're eating, then you are actually under-eating the amount of calories you need. So you assume that you're eating so much, but you're actually under-eating. And so the easiest way to avoid this is to pick. What do I mean by pick? I mean you have to pick between tracking raw and cooked weights. And once you pick one, stick with it. So if you're gonna be the guy who tracks the raw food weight, track all the raw food weights for your food. If you're gonna track cooked, stick with the cooked weights. If you want my opinion, I think the easier one to do is cooked because you're actually eating that amount of weight. With raw, you gotta account for all these different conversions, these losses, these gains in size. And so with cooked, you know that that amount of food that is on the scale is the amount that you are putting in your mouth, unless you're eating raw meat, which is kind of strange. Liver King. Pick one. I'll show you the opposite end of the spectrum. If we were to look at foods like pasta or rice, these are foods that actually gain weight. And so before we were looking at foods that lost weight, if any of the foods you're cooking require water, if you have to boil water to the food, the water then gets attracted to that food. And so this food takes in the water. That food weight is going to increase. But since there is 0 calories in water, that extra increase in weight doesn't account for any extra calories. And so the weight's gonna go up, but the calories are gonna stay the same. So if you were to look at a box of pasta, and on the nutritional label, it says for every 85 grams, there are 300 calories. And that's all good and well, but what they're doing is they're referring to 85 grams dry, 85 grams raw. If you were to eat 85 grams cooked, you would not get 300 calories. So how much weight do these two foods gain once they're cooked? From the hundreds and thousands of meals that I have personally cooked, pasta increases by 2.35x and white rice increases by 3x. And so if you were looking at this pasta, for example, and you look at our 85 grams from the box, 300 calories, like I said, those 300 calories, they're referring to it when it's 85 grams of raw weight. But what happens when we cook it? Well, if we 2.35x to 85, we get 200 grams. And so to get 300 calories of pasta, we have to eat 200 grams, not 85. For the longest time, I was eating 85 and thinking it was 300. Silly me. But if we're gonna be eating rice, then that 3x's. So rice, for example, for every 45 grams of dry white rice, there is 160 calories, except that is dry rice. And so we're not eating dry rice preferably. That means that when we cook the rice on average with the water, with the salt, and the water being attracted to the rice, it's going to triple in size. 45 turns to 135. And so to get 160 calories, we're gonna have to eat 135 grams of white rice. Real quick, if you want everything we've covered, not just in this video, but all of them, your life, your work, and the foods you like to eat, I do all of this stuff completely customized one-on-one. And so if you want everything tailored for you, you can go to theincrediblebulk.ca/join, apply for a call with me, and we'll see if you're a good fit. I wrote out some common foods that you might have on your body recomposition. And so we have chicken thighs, chicken breast, the white meat of the turkey, dark meat, ground beef, and frozen veggies. The things that I've highlighted red here are things that lose weight. And so a good rule of thumb is the fattier the meat, the more weight you're going to lose. So chicken breast, you can probably expect to lose between 15 and 20%. Chicken thighs would be 25 to 30. Turkey would be around the same as this. Dark meat would be 25 to 30. And ground beef, depending on how lean it is, you can expect to lose between 20 and 30%. Frozen veggies are around 10 to 15 from my experience. But when you have foods that attract water to it, again, 0 calories in water, like pasta and rice, these things will increase in size. And so pasta will 2.35x, while rice will triple. So if you look at these things, if you were to track these foods raw, then you have to make these conversions every single time. And so I personally think it's easier to track each of these foods when they are cooked. So only put it on the scale, only weigh it out when that food is fully cooked and ready to eat, because that is the amount of food that you are eating. That's probably the biggest mistake that people make when tracking their calories that nobody talks about. And so if you track it cooked, you don't have to make these conversions and you get it right pretty much every time. Boom. But what about the quality of our foods? Doesn't that matter? I mean, if we're eating the right amount of calories to do a recomp, does the actual food that we are eating matter? Absolutely. 100% it always will. Theoretically, you could lose weight and recomp just eating donuts and sugar cubes as long as you're eating less calories than you're burning off. And so if you were to eat below this maintenance in this little recomp area, you could have all of these calories come from donuts and still get some results, except that's probably not a good thing because your body's not going to run well off of donuts. So what kind of foods do we eat? We want to have more clean than dirty foods. And clean, if you want a definition for it, I think most things that come from the earth are considered clean foods. If it's not heavily processed, you can use your own judgment here. Ideally, you don't want to be having a bunch of dirty foods, McDonald's, sodas, ice cream, chocolate milk, cereal, that kind of thing. A good ratio to upkeep during a body recomposition is 80% of your foods are clean food sources, 20% you can be a little bit looser with, have what you want. As long as you are under this maintenance calories that we talked about. Now we're going to get into the numbers later in the video, but as long as you're under that maintenance calories and you're consistently losing fat, your weight is staying around the same, but you notice you're getting leaner, then I'd say you're in a good spot. But if you're getting so carried away with the foods you're eating and you tend to eat a little bit more than your maintenance calories, then you're not in a good place for a body recomposition, right? We're trying to get a little bit leaner. And so if you're a guy who's skinny fat, a big calorie surplus is never the way to go. We don't want to be gaining more weight. We already have too much fat. So you want to keep that 80-20 ratio. And you don't have to be perfect with it every time, but over the course of your recomposition, it's a good goal to shoot for. As for macronutrients, there are 4 macronutrients: protein, carbs, fat, and alcohol, but we're not worried about alcohol this video. How much of each macronutrient do we have? Instead of telling you how many grams of each macro you should have, because that number is going to be different for every person, I'll give you percentages, ranges to work with. Protein, ideally you want to have 25 to 30% of your calories coming from protein. And so if you were doing a bulk, that number would probably be 20 to 25. Why is protein a little bit higher here? The reasoning for this is that when you enter a calorie deficit of any kind, your body now has less calories to devote to muscle growth, right? Because muscle growth, building muscle, is not your body's #1 priority. Your body's priority is to survive. It doesn't care about being super jacked, even though you do, but your body's not going to agree with that. And so when you're eating less calories than your maintenance, the less calories that you are eating, the less your body cares about building muscle, and the more it cares about survival. And so it would make sense that if protein does build muscle, we would want to have a little bit more of it to be able to offset this calorie deficit. Now, if you enter a super hard cut, and I'm going to make a cutting video soon, but if you enter a super hard deficit where you're eating way below your maintenance, then you're going to have to up this protein intake pretty high, like 35-40%. But right now we're in a slight caloric deficit, and so we just need a little nudge higher than we would on a bulk. What about carbs? Actually, I'll do fat second. For most guys, 20 to 25% of your calories are coming from fat. The reason I'm covering fat as the second macro is because it's going to be the second most important macro that we have. So protein we want to keep sky high. You never want to sacrifice or cut down protein ever, especially in a recomposition or a cut scenario. In a bulk, typically 15 to 20% of your calories would come from fat. So why are we increasing fat in a recomposition? When you have super low fat, you run into a few issues, mainly with your hormones. So the big part about having dietary fats and good fats in the diet is that it helps produce and stabilize key sex hormones. Now, I don't mean sex as in having sex. I mean sex hormones like testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, and there's probably other ones I'm forgetting. But fat intake produces and stabilizes those key hormones. Now, if you have super low fat intake, then you're going to be lowering testosterone, lowering estrogen, not ideal. And so we want to keep fat at a relatively stable level. If we're eating less calories, we have less macros, we have less fuel. So we're going to have to adjust the macros based on our calories. And so you never really want to drop fat down. When guys enter a recomposition or a cutting phase, typically the first thing they drop is fat. And that's because they want to keep carbs high so they have energy for their lifts, which makes sense. And of course they want to keep protein high, at least they know that. But if you drop fat super low, if you're going like 15% and below, then you run into the hormone issue. If you're going way higher than 25%, like 35-40%, you're not giving enough room for protein in your diet, nor are you doing for carbs. And you're also making it hard to digest because fat takes a longer time to digest. So a good range to operate in is 20 to 25% on a body recomposition. Finally, we have carbs. And in my experience, the ideal range to operate in is going to be 45 to 55%. Now, in a bulking scenario, you can see that the macros are a little bit different here. In a bulk, I'd actually say as high as 65% of your calories can come from carbs, especially if you have muscles that you're trying to grow specifically. Now, you can always adjust the macro split between the three here, but for the most part, you're gonna need to keep protein high, like I said, and fat you don't wanna dip below because you run into the hormone issue. So I wanna keep carbs as the first thing that I kind of diminish. Now, I'm not against cutting carbs at all. I'm not a keto freak. I'm not any of those guys, but something has to get cut here. And so protein has to stay high. That's not an option. Fat, I would prefer to keep relatively high compared to carbs. And so for most of you watching this, 45 to 55% of your calories coming from carbs, solid place to start. Now, like I said, you can always adjust later. But what do these percentages even mean? I mean, I'm giving you these numbers, these ranges to work in, but George, I'm eating 2,500 calories a day, and I'm trying to do my recomp off 2,500 calories a day. What the heck do any of these ranges mean? How many grams of each macronutrient do I eat? How do I construct a recomposition diet? Great question. I'm going to show you how to build your own. We're going to do a little bit of math here. So for our example for this recomposition diet, we're going to be eating 2,500 calories a day. Now again, this number, do not eat 2,500 calories a day if you know you're supposed to eat more, if you know you're supposed to eat less. This is just the example I'm using. PSA for anyone listening. All right, how do we calculate this? So we know that the three macronutrients we're eating are protein, carbs, and fat. I'll put PCF right here. How many of each do we have to make up this calories? Well, we have to understand first that for every gram of each macronutrient, there's a certain number of calories. So what I mean by this is for every gram of protein, there are 4 calories. For every gram of carbs, there are 4 calories. For every gram of fat, there are 9 calories. And if you remember what I said about fat digesting slower, the reasoning for that is that there are more calories per gram than protein and carbs. More than double, actually. So how do we calculate this stuff? Well, if you remember our ranges from earlier, 25 to 30% of your calories are coming from protein, 45 to 55% from carbs, and 20 to 25 from fat. Again, for the last time, you can always adjust these numbers later, but they're a good place to start. So how do we know the amount of grams that we have for each macro to make up 2,500 calories? Well, we're going to multiply this by the percentage expressed as a decimal. So a little bit of math knowledge for you there. Which one do you guys want to pick? We'll go 25%. Multiply that by 0.25. I need a calculator. Actually, you know what? No, I don't. We'll do it live. $625. 625 calories of our 2,500 calories are coming from protein. And so do we have 625 grams of protein per day? No, that's not how it works. The reasoning why I showed you the little numbers here, because that's what we're going to divide it by. So 625, we now divide by 4. What does that equal? 156.25. We're going to be eating 156 grams of protein per day. And if you remember from earlier, like earlier, how much did our guy weigh? If you guys know that we want to have a little over 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Ideally, 1.2 grams per pound of body weight in protein on a body recomposition. And if you multiply 130 pounds by 1.2, hallelujah, it's 156. Magic. Just kidding. It's just math. So we want to be eating 156 grams of protein a day on a 2,500 calorie diet. Let's do carbs. I think we'll go for the higher range here, 55%. So now we'll multiply 2,500 calories by 0.55. And that comes out to 1,375. Once again, we're not eating 1,375 grams of carbs per day. We're going to be dividing this number by 4 because this is the amount of calories that are coming from carbs, not the amount of grams of carbs. So we're going to divide this number by 4. It comes out to about 344 grams of carbs per day. And so we got 156 grams of protein, 344 grams of carbs. Let's do fat. And so we can't do 25% here because 25% and 55%, that is 80% of our calories. And so we can't do 25% fat because we'll be at 105% of our calories, which you can't pass 100%. 100% is the max. So we are forced by default to go with 0.2, which is perfectly fine. So we're going to multiply 2,500 calories by 0.2. And so 20% of 2,500 calories is 500. For the final time, not 500 grams of fat, 500 calories coming from fat. But do we divide by 4 this time? No, we're dividing by 9. See how this is all shaping together? 500 divided by 9 is 55.55555. We'll just put 55 grams here because we rounded up here, we'll round down here. Ta-da! Those are our macros. 156 grams of protein per day, 344 grams of carbs, 55 grams of fat. I'll write them out right here. And so you can do this math for your calorie intake that we calculated earlier. So we started this video so far, I mean, we have a lot left to go, but we started this video with finding your maintenance calories, knowing that we have to enter a slight calorie deficit. We know how to track our calories. We know roughly what foods to eat. And now we know how much of each macro that we need to have to make up the calories that we've already calculated. But there's a part I haven't covered yet in that process, and that is how many calories are we eating below our maintenance, right? I said you had to enter a slight calorie deficit, but exactly how many calories do we eat? Let's do that right now. Now, we've been using 2,500 calories a day for this entire video. But how do you figure out the number for yourself? By following the steps in this video, you will know your maintenance calories. And so with that, you will also know how many grams of each macro to eat. But how many calories are we actually putting down? Well, I said that we're eating in a slight calorie deficit, meaning that we're going to be eating right behind this maintenance. And so for this to happen, we have to be eating slightly less calories. I've found that the best range to start in for a body recomposition is 100 to 250 calories below your maintenance. And so if you found your maintenance calories to be 2,500, you could start your recomposition at 2,250 calories to 2,400 calories a day. So you could start your recomp anywhere in this range. I think is a great place to start. I wouldn't go super far below this number, like cutting 300, 500, 700 calories below maintenance, because if you're doing that, then you're pretty much entering a cut, and we are skinny fat, right? We're not fat or obese or chunky or thick. We are skinny fat. And so we don't have a lot of muscle, but we do have a lot of fat. It's going to be pretty hard to build a lot of muscle if you are entering a really hard calorie deficit. Now, if you're new to the gym, if you've never been to the gym before and you're skinny fat, then yes, you can do a cut and still build some muscle. I personally think that a body recomposition is much faster to get you out of that rut and to get you to making gains. And so if you feel that you're skinny fat, drop 100 to 250 calories below your maintenance. So we're not adding calories. We're not doing more than this maintenance number. We're doing below. How long do we do a recomp for? It's a great question. So we know that we have to eat in a slight calorie deficit, but how long do we do it for? What's the duration of time, right? You'll notice with a bulking phase or a phase where you're deliberately trying to grow muscle, that phase is going to be a lot longer than a cutting phase or a recomposition phase. So for a bulk, depending on the types of foods you're eating, the amount of food you're eating, you can see pretty crazy results within 4 to 12 months. The less calories you're eating over your maintenance, the longer you can bulk for. If you're doing more of a dirty or a fast or a heavy bulk, then you probably wouldn't do it for as long. For a body recomposition, it is not nearly as long as this, but what you can do is you can repeat the process. So as for the actual length, it's going to be around 6 to 10 weeks. That would look like a month and a half to 2.5 months. Now you can go over this, you can go under this. This is just going to be a strong range for most people. Now, like I said about repeating this, a bulk, you typically can't repeat 2 bulks back to back. And so you can't do a bulk and then do another bulk right away. The thing is, the longer you bulk for, especially the more calories that you're eating, the more fat you are going to put on by default. That's just going to happen. You're not going to escape that. And so in most cases, when you're done a bulk, you're going to have to come back down to maintenance. So let's just say you bulk up, you bulk up, you bulk up. You can't do that again 2 times in a row in most cases. So you're going to have to creep back down to maintenance and eat that maintenance calories. The thing is with a body recomposition is that you can actually repeat it multiple times in a row. Now the amount of times in a row you can do it for, I don't know, but let's just say it's 3 times in a row. If you finish a recomposition and you're like, okay, I built a little bit of muscle, but I'm actually still a little chubby and I want to keep cutting down, you can either bulk up, repeat the recomp, or actually do a full cut. Now I did this with one of my clients, Olivier. I'll put his picture on the screen. So his waist was a little bit wider before. But what we did was we ran a recomposition because he wants to bulk up, he wants to get bigger, which I love the idea of that. But his body fat levels were a little bit too high for me to pull that off. And so I knew that we'd have to get him significantly leaner and get that waist shrunken down in order for him to be in a good position to bulk up. And Olivier is already super jacked, but it doesn't matter if you're super jacked if you're carrying too high levels of body fat. And so what we have to do is run a body recomposition. Then we can judge from there which direction we take. Now for him, we are currently running a mini cut. And so he's seeing good results, he's getting leaner, but we don't want to cut him down and drop his weight to the floor. We want to cut body fat. And so I'm not saying you have to go on like a Weight Watchers weight loss journey where it's like, I lost 100 pounds in 6 months. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to cut body fat. And so the goal of a recomposition, we are increasing the weight that we have from muscle and we are decreasing the weight we have from fat. And if you average these two out, you kind of end up in the same spot in terms of your weight. From a cut perspective, you're going to be losing weight. In a bulk perspective, you'll be gaining weight. So recomp is a really strong place for most guys, especially if you're skinny fat, because it allows you to sit in the middle. And then after you're done this 6 to 10 weeks of recomp, then you can pick which direction you want to take. That's how long you do it for, 6 to 10 weeks. Again, you can do it for longer, you can do it for shorter. I think 6 to 10 weeks is a great place to start. What do we do during the 6 to 10 weeks? Do we just eat 100 to 250 calories below maintenance and just sit there? Yeah, actually. In a bulk, you would actually be increasing the calories over time to keep progressing based on your weigh-ins, based on how you look. Are you fat? Are you still lean? On a cut, you will be decreasing calories, sometimes increasing them if we're going to have like refeed days or high carb days. But for the most part, you're going to be decreasing calories over time. The interesting thing about a recomposition is that you actually stay pretty much right here the whole time. You actually don't have to decrease calories much, and you definitely don't have to increase calories because that would put us in a surplus. So you can actually sit pretty much right here for this 6 to 10 weeks. Now, if you are not losing fat at the pace you'd like to, it would probably make sense to decrease a little bit more. If you are losing too much weight, which you wouldn't lose very much weight on a recomp, then you can stay in the smaller area. But you're not going to be losing pounds and pounds and pounds of fat and then slapping on pounds of muscle. Not how it works. It's a phase that is actually designed to be repeatable. And so you can run it again and again and again, meaning you don't have to enter a 500, 700 calorie deficit in order to see results. You can just operate in this small little range and then do it over and over. And if you're watching this video and saying, well, George, I don't want to do that. I want to get results today, right now. I wanted results yesterday even. My response to you is this. In order to see progress, you have to do the right things most days out of the week for long enough without quitting. And the guys who want the results right now, they want to rush their diet and they want to get it super fast, this is what they're missing. And if you're missing this, then you're missing this, and you're missing this. Because if you don't have the patience to stick with something long enough, then technically you're not doing the right things. And if you're not doing the right things for long enough, then most days you're going to be very impatient. And so my response to these people is that patience, as I define it, or how it's been defined for me, is figuring out what to do in the meantime. The problem with guys getting so attached to like getting the results right now is that they're not focused on the things that they do in the day-to-day. In previous videos, I've said people don't know how to set goals for the long term. And I've realized looking back at these videos that that's pretty crappy advice. So my bad. Here's exactly what I mean. Inputs versus outcomes. The easiest example I can think of is that getting jacked, building muscle, getting strong, that is an outcome. That is something that you want to have happen as a result of the inputs. And so the thing with inputs is that you have to do them right most days out of the week for long enough without quitting in order to get any kind of outcome. The inputs for a drunk driving accident are for me to drink enough alcohol and then get behind the wheel. right? If I don't drink enough alcohol or if I don't have my keys, it's pretty hard for me to cause a drunk driving accident. Now, somebody could cause a drunk driving accident on me. That's a possibility. But for me to be at fault, I'd have to do those things for this result to occur. What are the inputs that somebody has to do on a body recomposition? There are 4 inputs. And the inputs are to eat all of your meals, train hard, get to bed on time, and track metrics. Now, if I were to split up our inputs and our outcomes, we can take a look at what we want to have happen. Outcomes is just a synonym, a way to say, what do we want to have happen from this recomposition? Well, we want to get jacked, but more specifically, we want to lose fat and build muscle, preferably at the same time during a recomposition. And so we do that by doing these things every single day. And the more days that you're doing them every single day, and the longer you give yourself, the better these results are going to be. The more fat you'll lose and the more muscle you'll build. And so we've pretty much covered so far this one. Let's talk about these ones next. Let's start over here. What does training hard even mean? People say it all the time, oh bro, you gotta train hard. You know, we just gotta push ourselves in the gym, train with intensity. What does that actually mean and how do we do it step by step? I'm gonna show you exactly how. There's 5 ways I can break this down, but I wanna make a super clear point, just so we're all on the same page. The way you train in a cut is the same as the way you train in a bulk, is the same as how you train in a recomp. It is the same. You don't switch up your training. You don't do higher reps, lower reps, higher weight, lower weight. That stuff doesn't exist. We're training hard. We're training as hard and as heavy as we possibly can while maintaining these 5 things. So I'll show you exactly what I mean. And what I'm about to show you is non-negotiable. They're not a recommendation. They're not something you should do or you could do for better results. You have to do these in order to get good results. The first thing is to warm up. And this is always, if you are in a rush and you don't have a lot of time to work out and you're like, oh shoot, the gym's gonna close in an hour. I gotta get this workout in. I don't care if you don't do the rest of your workout, you gotta warm up. That's a given. You can't skip the warm up and go right into the working set. Why do people warm up? What's the point of this? Is that when you were training hard, your risk of injury goes up, right? If you're playing football and you're playing hard, you're probably gonna get hit a few times. But if you're just always on the sideline or running away from the ball, I don't play football, but if you're not involved in the game, then the likelihood of you getting hit and injured is much lower, but you're also not a part of the game. So you can pick how to live your life, but I'd rather live a life where I'm able to train hard, get good results, and then not get injured, decrease the probability of injury. That's exactly what warming up does. And so I've covered warming up on the channel before, but in short, you can warm up in a billion different ways. The 2 easiest ways are to warm up with a rubber band. It's like a rubber band shaped like that, or the exercise itself. So if you're doing bench press, you might warm up with bench press and you might do it with lighter weights for higher reps. And the more warm-up sets you do, the more weight you use and the less reps you do. So you might warm up with lighter weight at 15 pounds. Then you go a little heavier and you do 10, then 7, then 3, and then you're into your working set, your hard sets to failure. Speaking of training to failure, what is training to failure? The easiest way that I can define it is this. The muscle you're trying to train is the first one that fails. What do I mean by this? I have my dumbbell here, and if I'm doing curls with this dumbbell and I'm curling, right, we're curling, and then I get to the reps where it's getting really hard. And so let's just say I'm on my 9th rep, and then I get to my 10th rep and it's getting really tough. And so I decide to go for my 11th, and I'm trying to curl it as hard as possible. My hand's shaking, I can't get the weight up, and I cannot complete the rep, and the weight comes back down. I know that if my biceps were the reason that was happening, I have hit failure. And so what I was trying to train in that exercise was my biceps, and my biceps failed first. It would be a bit of a problem if I'm training and I'm curling like this, trying to swing the weight like that. If you think my biceps are doing a lot of work here, no, they're not. And so I'm using outside momentum. I'm using my shoulders and I'm using other body parts to lift this weight other than the muscle I'm trying to train, which is not the objective. So if you were to look at a leg extension, that is an exercise that targets the quads. So it makes sense that the quads should be the first muscle to fail. If the difference between you getting and not getting that last rep is strictly momentum, don't bother doing the rep because it's not the muscle you're trying to train that is working. If you're doing a chest fly, that is a chest exercise. And so you don't want the lack of momentum to be the reason why you can't get another rep. You want your chest to be the reason why you're failing. And so this 10-pound weight is 10 pounds. I want my chest to be unable to produce enough force to overcome this 10 pounds so I can do my fly or my curl or whatever. And so the heavier weight you use, the more force is required to get that weight from point A to B. That is what I mean by training to failure. So people say train to failure. And yes, it means that you can't do any more reps. This is true, but you want to make sure that the muscle you're trying to train is the first one that fails. Think about it. If you're doing deadlifts and your grip gives out, deadlifts is not a grip exercise. Deadlifts is not a form exercise. It is a back exercise. And so if you're doing deadlifts and the bar slips out of your hands because you can't hold on to it anymore, then your grip failed first, not your back. And so your back didn't get 100% of the work. Your back was not worked to its maximum ability, but we want to be training to the max. Train to failure. That's the second point. And if you're wondering why I wrote this arrow in red and the ones below it in orange, is that when you train to failure, there's actually two ways that I can further break this down. The first one is to decrease momentum. So by momentum, if I have my dumbbell here, momentum would be using pretty much any other force to overcome this weight that is outside of the muscle you're trying to train. Now I understand that your shoulders might move a little bit in a curl. Maybe your shoulder, as you can see my shoulder moving a little bit here, maybe it's not 100% biceps. Sometimes you will have a little bit of momentum, but we want to have less of it taking over the exercise rather than more of it. And so the more you can use that muscle you're trying to train in an exercise, the better off you're going to be. Now, some exercises like the squat, bench, and deadlift require multiple muscle groups, right? The bench press isn't just a chest exercise, right? You're using your shoulders, your triceps, your wrists, your forearms, your glutes, your upper back, your feet to plant yourself. There's a bunch of body parts that go into that, I understand. But the primary mover of the exercise, the primary muscle group, is the chest. And so you ideally don't want to be feeling your bench press in your shoulders or your triceps if you're trying to train your chest. And you definitely don't want to be bench pressing and then dropping the weight down, right? If we're bench pressing, I see this all the time in the gym, and it's especially with the young guys. I get it, you want to lift heavy weights, but if you're bench pressing like this, pretend I'm lying down, and then I just drop the weight down like this, first of all, your joints aren't prepared to take that kind of force that quickly. So you tell me, if I'm asking you this at home, who's more likely to get injured? The guy who lifts the heavy weight but brings it down slowly, or the guy who lifts the same heavy weight but drops it down, right? You're shocking the joint. It's not meant to take that kind of load, especially if you're trying for a 1 rep max with weight you've never done before. This is where most injuries happen. And so we want to decrease momentum. Now, momentum can happen on the way up if we're doing a curl. Momentum can happen swinging the weight up. Momentum can also happen dropping the weight down. And so we want to lift the weight using the muscle we're trying to train and then let it down with some sort of control. The second way I can break down training to failure is to increase ROM. What is ROM? ROM is an acronym for range of motion. So if I'm doing a bench press, for example, pretend I'm lying down. Remember the guy who's dropping the weight down like this, right? He's just dropping it down. A lot of those times, those guys also will just kind of go halfway and they'll do these little partial reps because they want to lift more weight and look more impressive to other people or impress themselves. Regardless of the reason, they're not using a full range of motion. And a full range of motion means going from a fully contracted position to a fully extended position. And so some people will be able to go deeper than you. Some people won't be able to go as deep as you will. The amount of range of motion you get depends on a bunch of different things like your age, your past injuries, if you have any, length of your limbs, flexibility. There's a whole bunch of things that go into this, but you want to go as deep as you can go. And so that would mean lifting every rep with a full contraction and a full extension. Right? If we're doing a curl, full contraction would be squeezing the weight up, bringing it up like this. Full extension, extension of the arm, right? A bench press, the extension would be bringing the weight down. Contraction would be pressing the weight up. On a pull-up, I mean, you can't see my arms here, but a contraction would be pulling down, and then extension would be letting your arms come all the way up. And so I'll squat down here so you can see. You can notice how when I'm doing my pull-ups, I'm not stopping like this. I'm going all the way up. Full extension, right? You want your joints to lock out. And so locking out your joints isn't dangerous unless you're doing it with a ton of momentum, unless you're not controlling the weight. And so what I mean by train of failure is three things. The muscle you're trying to train is the first one that fails. You want to decrease momentum and increase range of motion to make that happen. Point number 5, leave the gym. Don't come back. You don't need to train 8 days a week in order to see progress on your body recomposition. If you're watching this consistently going to the gym 4 to 5 days a week, that is plenty. And especially if you are doing these things, you are going to be training more intensely than you are now. That would mean that you don't need more training. In fact, I'd argue that you need a little bit less. And so for any new guy that's watching this, because if we're going to be doing a body recomposition and you're skinny fat, I'm going to take it that you're probably pretty new to the gym. Going to the gym and doing these 4 to 6 times a week is perfectly okay. I'm not against it at all. But when you go to the gym, you train hard, you lower momentum, and you increase the range of motion on all your exercises for every rep, and then you leave. So we know how to train. We understand the basic principles of training hard. What do we train? What muscles do we focus on if we're skinny fat, right? We're trying to improve the way we look. We're trying to lose fat, but we're also trying to build muscle. So where do we want to allocate the muscle that we're going to build? Ideally, we want it to be all over, but I'll give you some more specific areas of the body to target. So if we were to look at somebody who is skinny fat, this is somebody who does not have a lot of muscle mass, but does have a lot of fat. And so people who don't have a lot of muscle mass typically have thinner arms. And the size they do have on their arms is mostly fat. It's not clearly defined. We could also note that their waist is going to be a little bit wider than that of somebody who is in shape. Just say this guy's wearing shorts. Typically the legs aren't very well developed either. And so they will have skinny legs with a decent amount of fat on them. Draw some nipples. Pretty much no definition in the abs. Not ideal. So what do we do with this body? Well, if you were to look at someone who is in shape, someone who has a nice physique, kind of looks something like that, right? Not exactly perfect, but this guy has a tighter waist. So the first thing you'll probably notice between these two guys is the V taper of the torso. You can notice how it goes from the top of the shoulder down this way, right? Creating kind of a V. But this guy kind of looks like a loaf of bread. So, you know, that's not the kind of physique we're looking for. We're not looking for this blocky, you know, soft corner physique. We're looking for that V taper, that X frame, right? If you go from the arm to the leg and the arm to the leg, it creates a bit of an X. The second biggest thing you'll notice from that is the size of the waist. Even though this guy carries more muscle, he's bigger up top, he's got bigger legs, he's got bigger calves. This guy has a bigger waist. And so we want to tighten down the waist. This is what I mean when I say body recomposition is a state where you lower body fat and increase muscle mass. And if you have a really big waist, chances are your body fat is higher than you probably want it to be. Now, there are some guys who were just born with really wide hips. That is unfortunate, and that's something I can't change because that is part of your bone structure. That is what we call genetics, poor genetics, not ideal. And I'm sorry if that's you, but that's not something I can fix. A way to get around this is to get wider shoulders, wider lats. And so this is what this guy has. I'll show you what muscle groups to focus on if we want to go from this to this. Like I said before, every muscle matters when you're trying to get in shape, right? We're trying to develop everything to proportion. But there are some muscles that matter a little bit more than the other ones when it comes to going from skinny fat to jacked. And the most important one, by far, are the shoulders. The shoulders are actually made of 3 separate muscle groups. And there's one in particular that I want to focus on. And that is the lateral head. That is the side deltoid. Now, I'm not an anatomy expert, and I don't claim to be an anatomy expert, and this video is not about anatomy or where the muscles are in the body or what the names are. This is the side deltoid. So if you were to look at a lateral raise, right, this is when we're bringing our arm from beside us to out. And so that's working the side deltoid. You have your front, side, and then the rear is back here. And so we want to focus on the side deltoids more than anything. Why do we want to focus on the side deltoids, George? Great question. Those side deltoids are going to be the most important to give you that outside structure, that width up top, so that we can bring it down to a tight waist. Newsflash, you can't make your waist smaller through exercise. You can make it smaller through a caloric deficit, which is what we're in, but we're also trying to build muscle at the same time. And so we want to focus on the side delts. An easy way to train this is through lateral raises.